Evergreen Pines nursing home had the look of calm that only age could give. It stood quietly on the edge of town, its faded bricks softened by ivy and time. To most, it was just another place for the elderly to rest, surrounded by and silence. But on that day, something stirred beneath its floorboards, something that had waited over a decade to be found. Officer Don Whitaker parked his patrol car just outside the main entrance, the early sunlight casting long shadows across the gravel. In the back seat, Rex, his loyal canine partner, gave a sharp bark as if to say, "Let's get to work." Dan stepped out and opened the back door, letting Rex down. The German Shepherd stretched, then immediately began sniffing the air, ears perked. It wasn't unusual. Rex was always alert, but today his movements were faster, sharper. It didn't go unnoticed. The nursing home staff had placed a routine call the day before, reporting odd banging noises coming from the lower levels of the building during the night. One resident had also mentioned hearing voices in the basement, though the staff chalked it up to confusion or dreams. But the local police took no chances, especially when the call mentioned possible break-ins or vagrants using the lower floors for shelter. Inside, the facility was quiet and warm, the scent of flowers and antiseptic mixing in the air. A receptionist gave Dan a polite nod and directed him to the building supervisor, Mr. Carlton, who met them near the elevator. "Like I told the dispatcher, it's probably nothing," Carlton said, hands stuffed in his pockets. "That basement level was closed off during renovations years ago. We just use the top floors now." "Still," Dan replied, "it's best we take a look." Mr. Carlton hesitated before handing over an old ring of keys. "Be careful. No one's been down there in a long time." Don turned to Rex. "Ready?" Rex didn't need prompting. He was already sniffing toward a hallway that branched away from the reception desk. As they passed residents in wheelchairs and nurses going about their routines, Rex's behavior grew more intense. His ears twitched, his pace quickened. Finally, he stopped at a large wooden door, marked maintenance, no entry. Dan glanced at the label, then checked the keys until he found the right one. The lock clicked, and the heavy door creaked open. A narrow stairwell descended into darkness. The air shifted as they stepped in. It was cooler, still. A different smell lingered here, dust, rust, and something else Dan couldn't place. Rex descended quickly, almost pulling the leash taut. The basement wasn't much to look at. A few broken lights flickered as Dan's flashlight cut through the shadows. Shelving units lined the walls, filled with old equipment, medical supplies, and forgotten files. But Rex wasn't interested in any of that. He moved toward the far end of the hallway, then stopped at what appeared to be a wall. Dan watched closely. Rex sniffed the seam between two panels, wind, then began pawing at the base. That was when Dan noticed it. The texture of this wall was different. The paint was cleaner, the boards slightly newer. He stepped forward and pressed his palm against it, hollow. He looked down and saw faint drag marks on the floor, hidden beneath years of dust. Something had been opened here before. Don pulled out his radio, requesting backup at Evergreen Pines. Possible concealed area discovered. The reply crackled in his earpiece. Backup en route. While waiting, Dan knelt beside Rex. "Good boy," he whispered. Rex sat but kept his eyes trained on the panel. He wasn't done. When backup arrived, the officers worked carefully. With gloved hands and cautious tools, they pried the false wall loose. Behind it lay a narrow entrance, no more than 4 feet wide, leading into a hidden room. Don stepped inside, flashlight sweeping the darkness. Shelves of sealed boxes, a hospital bed, rusted equipment, forgotten photographs dot, and in the far corner, a patch of mismatched concrete that didn't belong. Dan narrowed his eyes. Rex moved toward it, then sat, as if he already knew. Thought something had been hidden here, and they had just begun to uncover it. Officer Don Whitaker stood at the threshold of the hidden room, the beam of his flashlight cutting through a thick layer of still air. Dust swirled slowly with every movement, as if the space itself had been holding its breath for years. Behind him, Rex remained focused on the corner where the concrete patch sat, rough and uneven, against the otherwise smooth floor. Something beneath it was calling to the dog's instincts. Detective Carla Mendez from the precinct arrived moments later, her eyes scanning the small, dim room as she took in the scene. She was sharp, intuitive, and known for her patience with cold cases. One look at the hidden space, and her demeanor shifted. "This wasn't a storage room," she said quietly, crouching next to the mismatched patch of floor. "This was hidden on purpose." Don nodded. Rex hasn't moved from that corner since we opened the panel. He's alert, but calm. Whatever's here, it's important. A small forensic team followed close behind, setting up temporary lights. The brightness revealed the room more clearly now. Metal shelves filled with dusty manila folders, a few cracked photo frames, old blood pressure cuffs, and stacks of yellowed papers. In one corner, there was even a rolled-up rug, brittle with age. But no one could take their eyes off the strange patch of concrete. "We'll need clearance to break it open," one of the forensic techs said, already snapping photos from different angles. "It's been tampered with, no doubt about that." As they waited, Don took a step toward the filing shelf. The folders were dry but intact. He pulled one at random. Inside were patient records dated more than 10 years ago. Most were marked discharged or deceased. But something seemed off. There were no forwarding addresses, no next of kin listed. Just initials, vague diagnoses, and final notes that didn't match typical reports. "Take a look at this," Dan said. Handing one of the files to Carla, she flipped through the pages. Some of these patients were admitted, but never officially discharged. There's no follow-up. It's like they just disappeared. Rex let out a sharp bark, startling everyone in the room. He pawed at the floor again, more urgently this time. The concrete wasn't just an odd renovation. It was hiding something, and Rex wanted them to hurry. With the green light from the local authorities, the forensic team began drilling into the patch. Each movement echoed around the small room like a heartbeat. Dust and bits of concrete flaked into the air. Dan kept Rex back while the team worked. It took nearly 20 minutes to break through. Beneath the concrete, embedded into the floor, was a rusted steel trunk, about 3 feet long and sealed with 2 heavy latches. The room went silent as it was lifted out and placed gently onto a clean sheet. No one spoke. Carla leaned forward and undid the latches. The lid creaked open slowly, and a musty scent spilled out. Inside were stacks of journals, brittle with time but still legible. Next to them, wrapped in cloth, were 2 worn photo albums and a single nurse's ID, badge faded but readable. Dan squinted. Mary Dunning. The name hit Carla like a wave. That's the nurse who disappeared 12 years ago. She worked here. Everyone assumed she left town. Rex sniffed the air and stepped back, tail lowered slightly. Dan carefully pulled out the journals and flipped to a random page. "I don't know who to trust anymore." The first entry read, "There are people being brought here who don't show up in the records. They're moved to the lower level, and I'm told not to ask questions. I tried to speak with the director. He said I was imagining things." Another entry followed. "I think someone's following me. I heard my name whispered near the stairwell. I'm going to hide copies of these notes, just in case." Dan and Carla exchanged glances. This wasn't just an old room. It was a sealed story, one that someone had worked very hard to keep buried. Outside the room, Mr. Carlton stood silently near the hallway, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. Carla stepped out and approached him calmly. "You said this area hadn't been used in years. Were you working here when Nurse Dunning disappeared?" Mr. Carlton didn't look up. "I've been here since the beginning," he replied. "I told everyone she left." "But she didn't, did she?" Carla asked. He didn't answer. Inside, Rex lay down next to the journals. His job done for now, but the story he had uncovered was only beginning to unravel. Detective Carla Mendez sat in the small conference room the staff had cleared out for the investigation team. The air was thick with the scent of age-like dust and disused, but it was the silence in the room that felt loudest. Spread across the table were Mary Dunning's journals, her neat handwriting narrating a story that had stayed buried beneath concrete for over a decade. Officer Don Whitaker leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, his eyes on the notes. Rex lay calmly at his feet, as if sensing the gravity of the situation. They had uncovered a sealed room, unearthed forgotten records, and now were staring at a mystery that had been waiting patiently for someone to care enough to ask the right questions. Carla flipped to another journal entry, her brows knitting, as she read aloud. October 4th. They moved someone again. Today Mr. Keegan, room 112. He wasn't on the transfer sheet. No ambulance came. I checked with the front desk, but they claimed he'd been discharged. I saw him only yesterday. He wasn't well enough to walk, let alone leave on his own. Dan sighed. How many entries like that are in there? At least 7 patients she mentioned by name. Carla replied. None have confirmed discharge. Records, all of them just vanish. Rex perked his ears, sitting up slowly, his gaze locked onto the hallway. Moments before the door creaked open, and a young officer stepped inside with a manila envelope. "This just came from archives," he said, handing it to Carla. "Personnel files, incident reports from the time Nurse Dunning went missing." Carla opened it, her fingers moving quickly through the papers. "There's no missing person report filed by the nursing home," she said, frowning. "In fact, there's a resignation letter, supposedly signed by Mary Dunning." Don raised an eyebrow. "You think it's fake?" Carla held the letter beside one of Mary's journal entries. "The handwriting doesn't match. Not even close." Rex let out a low growl, as if confirming the thought. Don straightened. "That's enough for a formal statement from Carlton." They found Mr. Carlton in his office, seated stiffly behind his desk. The blinds were closed, but light streamed in around the edges, illuminating dust, dancing in the air. He didn't look up as they entered. "Mr. Carlton," Carla began, setting the papers on his desk. "We found a sealed room under this building. A room with patient records, personal belongings, and notes from Mary Dunning, including evidence that she was planning to report suspicious activity." He folded his hands, his face unreadable. "This place has been running longer than most people remember. Not everything that happened here made it into reports." Dan stepped forward. "But you were the one in charge when Mary vanished." Carlton nodded slowly. "I didn't hurt her, but I didn't stop what was happening either." Carla's voice was calm but firm. "What exactly happened, Mr. Carlton?" He looked up at last, and for the first time, his eyes showed something close to guilt. She started asking questions. About patients that were being moved without medical necessity. About procedures that weren't approved. "I warned her to stop. I thought she left after that. Maybe someone made sure she did." "You knew there was a hidden room," Dan said flatly. "Yes," Carlton whispered. "But by the time I realized what it meant, it was easier to pretend it didn't exist." Carla stepped back. "You'll need to come with us." As officers escorted Carlton out of the building, staff and residents watched from doorways and corners. Some whispering, others stunned into silence. For many of them, this was just another quiet day until secrets buried beneath their feet began to rise. Back in the basement, forensic teams continued their work. One technician called Dan over. "We found something new," she said, pointing to a narrow crack behind the steel shelf. "Another compartment looks like it was sealed from the inside." The wall had a slight bulge, and after careful removal, they discovered a narrow gap, just wide enough to crawl through. Inside, lying untouched for years, was a second room. No lights, no ventilation. But in the center sat a single metal cot, a journal on the floor, and the remains of what looked like an old uniform. Don froze. "Is that?" Carla nodded. "Mary's uniform." Rex stepped inside and sat beside the cot. What had begun as a strange noise in the night had now become something much more, a revelation waiting to shake the entire foundation of Evergreen Pines. And they had only just scratched the surface. The silence in the second hidden room was almost unbearable. Even with the distant echo of boots on tile and radios crackling upstairs, it felt as though time itself had frozen there. Officer Don Whitaker stood in the doorway, flashlight steady, as the beam landed on the center of the room. A cold steel cat, a faded journal, and a single nurse's uniform crumpled near the wall. The air was dry, stale, as if it hadn't moved. In over a decade, Detective Carla Mendez stepped in beside him, her eyes fixed on the cot. "This was a holding room," she whispered. "There's no other reason to seal off a space like this. No window, no air, not even plumbing. Whoever was here wasn't meant to leave." Don knelt beside the journal on the ground. Its pages were yellowed and fragile, but the writing inside remained clear. It was Mary Dunning's handwriting, deliberate and frantic. He opened it gently, turning to the first entry. "If someone finds this, I'm sorry I couldn't get out. I've tried to document everything, but I think I've run out of time. They know I've been writing. They know I saw what they did." Carla looked over his shoulder, reading in silence. The pages revealed everything. Mary had been keeping secret notes for weeks, carefully hiding them in various places. One copy she buried in the trunk beneath the concrete. Another she kept with her in this room. She had been locked away after voicing her concerns too loudly. "They told me I was confused, that I'd made mistakes in my records. Then I was no longer scheduled. They told the others I'd left. I heard the door lock behind me 3 nights ago. No one's come since." Dan clenched his jaw. She was buried alive in paperwork, silenced by people she trusted. Rex paced slowly around the edges of the room, pausing near a metal grate on the floor. He sniffed once, twice, then sat. His tail tapped once before going still. "What is it, boy?" Dawn asked, kneeling to inspect the great dot. It was bolted shut but loose around the edges. Carla called in a technician, and within minutes, the grate was removed. Below it, a small crawlspace led to a maintenance tunnel. A quiet moment passed before one of the officers volunteered to go in. He crawled in with a flashlight and re-emerged several minutes later. His face pale. "There's another storage space under the tunnel," he said. "2 more crates, both locked." Down in the crawlspace, investigators uncovered what appeared to be emergency medical storage, except nothing about it was standard. The crates contained unused syringes, boxes of prescription vials, and paperwork, marked confidential, internal use only. Some of the drugs were experimental, others unapproved for geriatric use. Many of the names listed on the inventory matched patients Mary had written about in her journals. Back upstairs, Carla's phone buzzed. Forensics had completed a preliminary match on one of the personal items found in the original trunk. It belonged to Leonard Wills, a man who had been reported missing by a niece 12 years ago after being placed at Evergreen Pines. At the time, the home had claimed he left against medical advice. But the journal entries told a different story. Mr. Wills cried when they moved him. "He begged me to stay. They said he was going to a special care unit. I never saw him again." Dawn stood, silent for a moment, staring at the uniform in the corner. She knew everything, and no one believed her. Rex moved back to the cot and sat again. Carla looked at Dan. "We need to open every file, every record. If even half of this is true, there are more people who never got justice." The search team expanded. The entire lower level was now a crime scene. More boxes surfaced. Audio tapes, medical reports. And beneath another sealed cabinet, they found what appeared to be Mary's work badge, still clipped to a rusted clipboard. No body, no final message, just her truth, preserved through ink, time, and the instinct of a loyal canine who refused to walk away. Outside, as the sun began to fall behind the trees, a quiet crowd had gathered. Residents, family members, former staff. Whispers spread quickly. The truth was no longer buried, and the investigation was far from over. The more Detective Carla Mendez and Officer Dan Whitaker dug into the records, the more questions arose. The nursing home's carefully maintained image was cracking, revealing a darker story of neglect and secrets. The forgotten patients Mary Dunning wrote about weren't just names on old files, they were real people, many of whom vanished without explanation. Carla sat at her desk late into the night, surrounded by stacks of patient records and medical logs. She cross-referenced every name Mary had mentioned in her journals against the official discharge and transfer documents. For some, the paper trail stopped abruptly. Others showed transfers to unknown facilities or were listed as having left against medical advice, despite testimony from staff indicating otherwise. One name in particular kept standing out: Harold Keegan. According to the documents, Harold had been moved from Evergreen Pines 12 years ago, but the transfer was never logged, and his niece, who had tried to visit multiple times, never received any notice. Carla dialed the niece's number. "Hello," a tired voice answered. "I'm Detective Mendez, with the local police." Carla introduced herself. "We're investigating some old cases involving Evergreen Pines nursing home. I wanted to ask about Harold Keegan." There was a pause. "Harold, my uncle. I thought he was still here. No one told me he was moved or anything." Carla jotted down notes and promised to keep her updated. The niece's confusion was echoed in other families' voices. Multiple relatives admitted they had not been informed of patient transfers or changes in status. Many hadn't heard from their loved ones in years. Meanwhile, Officer Dan and Rex returned to Evergreen Pines, retracing the hidden areas. Rex's nose led them to a neglected wing, one no longer used for residents. The hallways were dim, with peeling paint and cracked windows. The air smelled of mildew and forgotten memories. They entered a storage closet and found sealed boxes of patient belongings, eyeglasses, dentures, handwritten letters packed away and forgotten. Many were labeled with patient names, including some from Mary's journals. Dawn picked up a faded photo of a smiling, elderly man, his name written on the back: Harold Keegan. "This place hid more than just rooms," Dawn muttered. Back at the police station, Carla met with a retired nurse who had worked at Evergreen Pines during Mary Dunning's time. She was brave, the nurse said softly. "Mary tried to do the right thing, but she was scared. She told me about patients being taken to parts of the building where no one else went." "Did you ever see where they were taken?" Carla asked. The nurse shook her head. "No, but I heard rumors about isolation rooms. about treatments that didn't make sense. Carla felt a chill. Mary's journals had mentioned unusual treatments, some that weren't medically approved, even for that time. As days passed, more families came forward, sharing stories of loved ones who simply vanished from the home's records. It became clear that these patients were not only forgotten, but deliberately erased. The state's health department launched an immediate investigation. The nursing home's license was suspended, and authorities began combing through every file, every corner of the aging building. In the meantime, Dan and Carla continued to explore the basement and hidden corridors. One evening, Rex led them to a locked filing cabinet. Inside, they discovered a stack of unfiled incident reports, complaints from patients and staff that had never been addressed. One report described a patient's sudden disappearance. Another detailed suspicious drug use in the facility. The pieces were falling into place. Mary Dunning had uncovered a conspiracy to hide negligence, to cover up abuses, and to erase those who threatened to expose it. But despite all they found, one mystery remained: Mary's own fate. The investigation into Evergreen Pines had taken a sharp turn. What began as a noise complaint and a missing nurse's mystery had grown into a sprawling inquiry with state officials and federal agents now involved. The weight of hidden truths pressed on Detective Carla Mendez and Officer Dan Whitaker like never before. Weeks of combing through documents revealed a disturbing pattern. Patient files were incomplete, altered, or missing entirely. Financial records showed unexplained expenses, including large sums paid to unknown contractors. But the biggest shock came when they began scrutinizing the nursing home's director, Mr. Carlton. Carlton had been with Evergreen Pines since it opened, overseeing every renovation, every policy change. Yet his answers grew vague when questioned about the hidden rooms, the missing patients, and Mary Dunning's disappearance. Carla sat across from him during a tense interview. "Mr. Carlton," she said carefully, "we've uncovered records showing patient transfers that don't exist, funds diverted from care budgets, and your knowledge of the sealed lower level." Carlton's eyes flickered, but he remained composed. "This facility has had its struggles. Detective budget cuts, staffing shortages. Some decisions were made to keep the home running. Decisions that hid suffering," Carla pressed. Carlton sighed. Mary Dunning was, passionate, maybe too passionate. She threatened to go public with her concerns. "I did what I thought was necessary." Dan watched silently, his jaw clenched. "Necessary? You locked her away. You ignored patients who disappeared. You lied." Carlton looked down. "I'm not proud, but this place cared for hundreds. Not all stories are black and white." Meanwhile, forensic teams continued searching the hidden rooms. One afternoon, a technician found a folder marked Internal Audit 2008, buried beneath patient files. The report was damning. It detailed improper medication administration, unauthorized use of experimental drugs, and efforts to hide adverse reactions. The appendix named patients who'd been moved or lost under suspicious circumstances. Among the files was a ledger listing payments made to an unlicensed company and organization specializing in removing patients quietly, without documentation. Hands trembled slightly as she read. "This goes beyond neglect. This is criminal." Dawn placed a steady hand on her shoulder, and Mary tried to stop it. The media caught wind of the investigation. Headlines shouted about abuse at Evergreen Pines, and the bravery of a dog who helped uncover the truth. Families of missing patients came forward, demanding answers, compensation, and justice. Back at the nursing home, the building was sealed off completely. Construction workers removed old walls, revealing more hidden spaces. Among them were makeshift isolation rooms, some with traces of medical equipment long forgotten. Carla and Dawn returned to the basement for one last look. Rex padded ahead, sniffing along the walls as if saying goodbye. Dawn knelt beside a cracked photo frame, found in the trunk the smiling faces of patients and staff, a reminder of lives interrupted. "Do you think Mary would be proud?" Dan asked quietly. Carla smiled faintly. She risked everything so those voices wouldn't be lost. Outside, the community gathered for a vigil, lighting candles to honor those who had suffered in silence. The investigation was far from over, but thanks to Rex's sharp instincts and the courage of a nurse who refused to give up, hidden truths were finally being brought into the light. The investigation into Evergreen Pines nursing home was no longer just a local case. Media coverage had spread statewide, drawing attention from advocacy groups, lawmakers, and former employees. Families who had once been ignored now gathered together, sharing stories that ranged from sorrow to anger. And at the center of it all was the man who had overseen the home for decades, Mr. Carlton. One crisp morning, detectives arrived to escort Carlton from his home. His face was pale but calm, as if he had known this day would come for a long time. During the questioning, Carlton finally began to reveal the details of what had happened behind those sealed walls. There were orders from above, he said quietly, to keep things quiet. Patients without family, those who cost too much to care for, they were ... moved elsewhere. Not always through proper channels. I was told to make it look like they left voluntarily. Detective Carla Mendez listened carefully. Moved elsewhere, where? Carlton hesitated. Some were sent to other facilities. Others, well, some didn't have a destination at all. It was supposed to be a way to manage costs and keep the home's reputation intact. Outside the building, Rex lay quietly beside Dan as news crews set up cameras. Dan had watched the dog's alertness throughout the investigation. How Rex seemed to sense the weight of the truth, hidden beneath layers of denial. As Carlton's testimony deepened, the story grew more troubling. He spoke of Mary Dunning, the nurse who had tried to expose the truth. She found a hidden room, Carlton admitted. When she threatened to speak out, she was locked away in that basement room. It was meant as a warning. But she left journals proof of everything. Carla glanced toward Dan. You found those journals? Carlton nodded slowly. I'm sorry. For everything. The day Carlton was charged, the community gathered outside Evergreen Pines. Former residents, family members, and activists held signs demanding justice. For many, it was the first step toward healing. Meanwhile, forensic experts continued to analyze the evidence found in the hidden rooms. DNA tests confirmed personal effects belonged to patients listed as missing. Records once thought lost were recovered, exposing a pattern of deliberate concealment. The nursing home's license was permanently revoked, and new laws were proposed to tighten oversight of elder care facilities across the state. Mary Dunn's name became a symbol of courage for whistleblowers everywhere. Dan and Carla attended the hearing where the judge praised the dedication of everyone involved in uncovering the truth. Rex received a commendation for his crucial role, earning a medal for service that sparked a wave of gratitude from the public. Despite the progress, some questions remained. The full extent of the hidden abuses might never be known. But one thing was clear: the voices of those forgotten would no longer be silenced. As the sun set behind the town, Don watched Rex resting by the firehouse. The dog had been more than a partner. He had been a beacon, one that led them into darkness and back into the light. And the story of Evergreen Pines was finally being told. The quiet town that had once admired Evergreen Pines nursing home for its gentle care now grappled with a truth that had lain hidden for more than a decade. As the dust settled from investigations, court hearings, and media storms, the community found itself at a crossroads between mourning the past and rebuilding hope for the future. Officer Dan Whitaker sat on the porch of the police station, watching Rex rest comfortably at his feet. The German Shepherd's dark eyes held the calm confidence of a dog who had seen too much yet remained steady. Rex's discovery of the hidden rooms had triggered an avalanche of revelations that changed everything. It's been a long road, boy, Dan said quietly, reaching down to scratch behind Rex's ears. Rex let out a soft sigh, as if understanding every word. For Dan, the story was more than just a case solved. It was a reminder of the power of persistence, loyalty, and the voices that refused to be ignored even when buried beneath layers of silence. Mary Dunning's bravery had sparked a movement. Following the closure of Evergreen Pines, new policies were enacted statewide to improve oversight of elder care facilities. Regular inspections became stricter, whistleblower protections stronger, and families more empowered to demand transparency. Several families of the forgotten patients formed support groups, finding strength in shared grief and hope for justice. Memorials were held in honor of those whose stories might have remained forever hidden, if not for Rex's sharp nose and unwavering determination. Dan and Carla Mendez remained close, their partnership forged through months of tireless work. Together, they attended community meetings, speaking about the importance of vigilance and compassion in protecting society's most vulnerable. One afternoon, the local sheriff's department held a ceremony. Rex was awarded the K9 Medal of Valor, a shining emblem pinned to his vest. The room was filled with applause, tears, and heartfelt gratitude. Don took the microphone. Rex didn't just find a hidden room. He uncovered years of silence and gave a voice to those who had none. This medal is for every patient who deserved better. For Mary, who risked everything. And for every canine and handler who stand ready to protect and serve, Rex wagged his tail, basking in the warmth of the moment. The legacy of that hidden room was not just about secrets revealed, it was about justice, healing, and change. It reminded everyone that even the smallest clue, the quietest bark, can lead to truth. As Dan walked Rex out of the ceremony, the dog stopped to sniff the ground near an old oak tree. Dan smiled. Still on the case, huh? Rex looked up with bright eyes, ready for whatever came next. Evergreen Pines was gone, but the story it held, the lives it touched, and the courage it inspired would live on. Because sometimes, the bravest heroes don't wear badges, they have paws.